Hey, it's Dean. Welcome to the Manful Yoga Podcast. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Brian McKenzie. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm super stoked about this. Um, Brian and I were introduced via Kelly Starrett. I was working on Yoga for Athletes. Kelly had agreed to do the foreword for that book, and I was struggling to find somebody who would be a good fit to write about the endurance portion. And he connected me with you, and we got to talking. And I'm assuming at some point, you mentioned that you were an endurance athlete specialist, but the whole time you were talking about breath and how breath had taught you so much about health and wellness as a whole. And I had to go read up on all the stuff that you did on endurance training to even like, oh, this guy's a big fucking deal with endurance training. So I'll ask you about that, but first part, that's how we met. And we ended up having a few more conversations to help, get all the content for the book together. And I'm really happy with the way that came out and with your contributions as far as, applying breathing to the poses and how to check in with your breathing while you're doing the poses to make sure you're doing them correctly. So if you haven't gotten the book, please get the book. You get to see some awesome tips in there from Brian. But Brian, how did you start off as an endurance training or specialist? I don't even know what to call it. What would you call yourself 10 years ago? What would you have called yourself?
Strength and conditioning coach. But I've been at it in human performance for more than 20 years, which is odd to say. I don't know that I my background began in human movement, basically. Although I was going to school, and that's kind of a foundation for a lot of things. I figured out that I really enjoyed biology and stressing biology and what came of that. So that was the only thing I ever that kind of tickled my fancy. In terms of school, I dropped out of high school my senior year. I ended up getting a GED because I was so bored with school and over it. And then I went to college and messed around until I stumbled into exercise science. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And but then I had so many damn questions, and literally no professor was answering them. They couldn't. It wasn't that I was looking for answers. They just weren't exploring in the way that I was. So I ended up deviating towards mentorship primarily, and was brought under the wing of a gentleman, Dr. Nicholas Romanoff, who was the creator of the pose method of running. And he had opened the doors years ago, before 2000, on looking at running in a very different aspect. And he kind of spun my head on movement on the way I understood it. He was dealing with runners. I had gotten roped into doing a triathlon because I was going to this like underground spin gym, and it was not today's spinning. It was a very it was like fucking Metal Militia. Like, it was out of control. It was in a dungeon. The place was gross. It was
it was not uplifting.
It was not uplifting at all. Okay. And people routinely, if they showed up for the first time, were throwing up. That was just what it was very intense. And that was my first introduction to intensity. But nonetheless, I got roped into doing a triathlon. I successfully overtrained for a triathlon. My background was in swimming and water polo. I swam and played water polo for many years. I came out of that triathlon in 10th place. And then I got on the bike and probably lost 50 places. And then I got on the run where I was passed by just about almost everybody in that fucking triathlon, where I was encouraged to keep going by several overweight people. I'm not overweight. I've never been overweight. But I got my ass kicked and I had overtrained for that thing. And I had shin splints, all this stuff. And like Romanoff really spun my head, because in one weekend he showed me that I didn't actually have shin splints. What I had was a movement problem. And so that was why Kelly Starrett and I ended up hooking up very, very early on, because we saw movement as a very different aspect, much like Romanoff. And that
what was the way it was being taught? What was the...
Well, Romanoff was teaching it from the perspective of gravity. Most of what's taught in human movement is all about how much power one can produce and force. Not that that's not what's happening with gravity, but he changed things instead of looking at. So for instance, when we run, it's falling. And it's catching yourself falling and repeating that. But we've gotten caught in this world of, you can see this with sprinters a lot, even though some sprinters are pushers, some of them are pullers. And it's not that there's any right or wrong. There ain't two different zebras that run differently. There aren't cheetahs that run differently. Okay. There's only human beings who are dysfunctional. And I'm a part of that. Right. But nonetheless, getting people to understand the functional and like getting your foot to land underneath you, so you're not creating as much leverage or you're not stopping yourself as much, was a big part of this paradigm. It's like pressing overhead and being out in front of yourself. Like if I continue to press out here, I'm creating leverage on my shoulder that's unnecessary, versus like getting it up and overhead. These are all positional things like in yoga. Right? Like it's really taking the construct of human movement and applying it broadly and universally. There is no we are special. We live under the same laws everything else does. Nonetheless, I got my ass kicked in my first triathlon, which humbled me so deeply that I got into endurance sports. I got into triathlon for some time, but I was already doing some coaching and movement stuff with people. And that accelerated kind of and I was so curious at the time, and still am in many aspects, just with other things, that I wanted to explore this thing that was like, I thought I overtrained for, and like, then I did an Ironman and I trained my brains out for it and felt like shit for like a month after that. And that was just kind of the norm and what everybody was doing. And, I didn't come up with some concept. I challenged a lot of the status quo and norm. And, Romanoff helped very early on. But there were a number of people and influencers, including people like Louis Simmons, who I had VHS tapes of Louis from the 90s. Like I was in the 90s, I was watching Louis, teach the bench, the squat, the deadlift. I started applying a lot of concepts to endurance training because endurance athletes were one of a couple, sports that failed at applying strength and conditioning. They were doing like Bosu ball shit and like going to yoga just to get flexible. And I did all of that stuff. And that is not what those mediums are about. So I created a paradigm shift, around 2006, 2007, that began with endurance, where I started exploring, looking at lowering volumes of training, but applying strength and conditioning concepts and more intensity to some of the training. But the caveat is that skill development was at the forefront of all of this. So basically we were rewiring people on skill development, like running drills, etc. Squat, deadlift drills, pressing drills, like all these things, like movement, mobility, all of this stuff was getting applied around these things. And it just made it so that we couldn't be doing 3 and 4 hour runs or bike rides on the weekend because it was just too much. And, um, you know, it was a low volume approach to things. It's not that I think there's, you know, I've talked in the past about how volume was a big problem, but you know, some people can handle volume, but most people can't handle intensity, true intensity, including CrossFitters. CrossFitters get very accustomed to the pace that they're going at, and they like intensity starts to falter and things become this kind of yellow light area. Think of intensity as a green yellow, like a light system, green yellow red, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of American endurance athletes, which is why they suck, like American endurance athletes are not that great comparably. And the reason, one of the theories of this is because they're all in the yellow zone. They're training in the yellow, where they're using carbohydrates as the main fuel source in aerobic function versus fat. And like not that you're not going to use glucose, but they're very rarely using carbohydrates at these red intensities because they're so cooked they can't actually get to those higher intensities, where you'll see a lot of the these African runners, etc., who can literally peg it in red zones, but a lot of it's done in the green. And this is where a lot of the skill development, etc. And then, you know, whatever. I wrote a couple books that followed this whole paradigm shift. They did fairly well. The second one was a New York Times bestseller. You know, it guided a lot of people to who were struggling, who were injured a lot, who were not getting results that they liked, who did not feel like they had the lives they wanted because they were training so much. It opened a very big door for that. It also pissed off a lot of people because people cling to their sports and their activities as ideologies. And it challenged a lot of people who had been doing this long, slow distance approach, but didn't really understand the long, slow distance approach. Nonetheless, breathing entered the world because somebody handed me a training mask, which said elevation training mask on it. And I at the time had probably been studying hypoxic training and altitude training for probably close to 6 or 7 years at that point.
What would hypoxic training be described as for people who don't know what that means?
Yeah, low oxygen.
Okay.
Low oxygen. So hypoxia and hyperoxia would be high oxygen. So normoxia is normal, like you're not manipulating levels of oxygen. So I was into this stuff very early on. Like I didn't even realize that this had a connection to breath control yet, right? But I had been studying this stuff, had altitude simulators, had O2 scrubbers, screwed around. Like I'd been screwing around for years, and then this elevation training mask was handed to me, and there's nothing on it except resistance, and I just laughed and was like, it can't change. It's this if this device somehow changes pressure, which it doesn't, right? Like meaning barometric pressure. So like as you go higher, the air gets thinner, right? That's why altitude sucks. It's still 21%. It's just so dispersed and it expands. It's harder to diffuse and perfuse. So that's why altitude's difficult for people. But if you train low oxygen, you can train your body to tolerate those levels where you drop. Like I'm at 6,000 feet right now. Like I sit at 6,000 feet. Natural blood oxygen levels for this is like 94%. Right?
Oh, wow.
So if I'm where you're at in Austin, I'm 99 to 100 because I actually train myself in regards to keep my oxygen saturations levels high. So nonetheless, I laughed, but I knew when I laughed that I'd never put that device on. So I was like, fuck. All right. So I put this thing on. And when I put it on, I did this. And I sat up and I organized myself very differently. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like this is what I was being told when I was going to that Ashtanga practice I had many, many years ago. But as an endurance athlete, I was just going to get flexible and like controlling your breathing and why you were out of breath from position to position in an intense yoga practice, yet you were a triathlete who was cardiovascularly supposedly functioning very well. I entered the rabbit hole and was like just head blown apart because I was like, wow, I have something I could give to every athlete I have them warm up at this. They'd organize themselves better, start using their diaphragms more and their primary breathing muscles.
So let me kind of try to understand this. So that device for you forced you to, and I brought this up with Kelly in the interview, but I've never heard this concept of organizing the self. And he mentioned, okay, yeah, we have old coaches and this is a term that they use. So by organizing, I guess I would describe it as putting your spine into a neutral position.
Did you just refer to me as an old coach?
No, I said I said you had old coaches. No, I did not. No,
I'm kidding. Go ahead.
But so organizing the spine, at least my understanding, how I would put it into words, is putting your spine into a neutral position such that, I mean, the ideal situation is put it into a neutral position such that you can expand and feel your breathing expand in all directions evenly from the base of your spine all the way to your ribs. Whereas if you're in an unorganized position, you're unable. I'm not going to use the term diaphragmatic breathing because I know you hate that.
Yeah. Well, I don't. It's just incorrect. But yeah,
incorrect because you're using your diaphragm no matter what.
Yeah.
But if you're in a position where you are unable to fully access your breathing capabilities, then we would not say organized. But anyways,
correct. And I think that even in motion or even in positions as we challenge, even though it looks like I'm getting unorganized, I can organize myself, right? Like it's not all about getting rigid and stiff. It's like, oh, I'm going to use my breather like right now. So I need access to this thing. And when I'm in this poor position or I'm unorganized, it's really hard for me to actually breathe against resistance, right? So I can get away with murder if I just open that trap of mine and start breathing. And that's where there were a few people talking about nasal breathing when we began to, Patrick McKeown being one of them. But there weren't a lot of people that knew about it. And I came into understanding nasal breathing through this resistance breathing device because I was all about the resistance breathing device for like the first 2 years. I was really invested in this. And then I after enough time of using this thing, and look, we were not using it in everything, but I caught on to the fact that I was using my nose most of the time because it was so much easier to draw it. Like with resistance, I could get more power from my nose. I was digging deeper by drawing a breath from my nose versus I can get away shallow. My neck muscles I start to engage my neck muscles, etc. I just can get away with a lot more. So that began at that point. I then started looking at the physiology behind everything. And I was
So that's really interesting because I have to tell people ask me all the time, do I have to breathe in and out of my nose? I'm like, I mean, you don't have to, you're not going to blow up, but it's better if you do. And then they say, why? And then I say, well, fortunately, I have Brian McKenzie on the podcast, and he can tell you why nasal breathing is better. So I'd love for you to answer that if you could.
Yeah, real simple. The simple answer to that is your respiratory system was designed with your nose in mind, not your mouth. Your mouth was designed with your digestive system and communication system, your vocal cords, right? So there is really one main way of filtering the air when you breathe through your mouth, which is the fourth basically way of filtering air if you breathe through your nose. Okay. So you have as many hair follicles in your nose as you do on your head. That's a filtering system. The mucus is a filtering system. Then you have turbinates, which is the most advanced filtering system that we know of. And we can't actually replicate that. Like, we can't actually replicate. There's a lot of things we think we're so really smart with, you know, and filtering is not one of them. We cannot even come close to how the nose actually filters things, spins the air, moves the air, humidifies the air, gets it ready for going into your lung tissue, which has no defense. You have one, which is your tonsils here, and that's about it. Your saliva is designed to break things down and aid in things, but it does not filter air. The air passes right through. So it's an emergency system, and it's a system that's designed for when you're actually speaking, which is also why if you talk a lot all day, you feel, you know, a little cooked at the end of the day. Or if you're anybody who lectures or goes and speaks somewhere, why you'll feel exhausted when you're done, because you're actually using different energy. You're digging out you're in that yellow zone that I talked about earlier. If you breathe out of your mouth, you're a yellow zone person. So you're burning the high, like you're just burning at mid range all the time. And talking is one of those things.
So, and one of the other parts of what you were discovering with your training was that people needed to train at the lower intensity. So they needed to train at a level in which they could maintain nasal breathing as opposed to huffing and puffing in and out of their mouth. And that allowed them to, even though they weren't putting out as much and they weren't doing, you know, they weren't running as fast, or they weren't whatever, well, in terms of endurance athlete, they weren't moving as fast. They were making more progress over time training at these low. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we started testing this stuff. Nobody's tested it. So we, the Rob Wilson, Brian Diaz, and you know, Emily Hightower, people who I work with. Rob and I in particular, at the time, decided to get a few metabolic carts. And that that's something that analyzes gas exchange. That's how you test, when you test VO2 max, when you test energy systems, when you test how people use energy, it's done through gas exchange, because we know by how much oxygen you bring in, how much oxygen comes out, and how much CO2 comes out of the system, we know what you're burning or using as fuel. Okay. So whether you're using fats, proteins, or carbohydrates, and that's basically the process of how respiratory exchange ratio works, right? It's a you know, and so we went and started testing things with like nasal breathing. And this is where we ended up developing a gear system towards things, because we started to see that there were particular gears that actually happen. So a lot of people who are onto this are like, yeah, nasal breathing's everything. You know, you just got to nasal breathe. And it's like, yeah, you don't understand quite yet. You've gone about half what, you know, you've put your foot in the water. It goes beyond that, but that's a great place to start, and you're going to see fundamental changes. And the biggest fundamental change is that if you stay nasal breathing, you can pretty much guarantee you're just in or just out of that yellow zone. So intense nasal breathing will have you in that yellow zone, right? So if that's yellow. You're definitely burning carbohydrate at that level. You're becoming a little more anaerobic at this place.
And what would be the level that you would want to? Let's say you're going for a 5-mile run. What's the pace of nasal breathing you would want to have?
That's a gear. We call that a gear 1.
Okay.
Gear 1 is primarily what you want to develop, but most people don't like that because they have to slow down so much. And this is where that green zone comes in, is that, you know, people just really, their egos are attached to things. You know, Greg Glassman had a very famous quote. He said something at a dinner once, and he's like, yeah, men will die for points. I figured that out. So we made a sport about it. Like, well, he just used people's like dysfunction against themselves. We are so willing to die for what points for how fast we think we need to be versus actually taking the time to understand physiologically how to develop. And this is part of that American paradox, right? Like in the West, like it's a Western thing. It's not just American. It's the West, Canada as well. But so when you're in a gear 1, which is an equal in and out nasal only, that's about roughly one breath every 3 to 6 seconds in length. Okay. That's a large spectrum, but roughly at about 3 seconds from what we've seen in developed people. So there is a caveat here, and this is where the research has been really shady. Is there's been 1 or 2 research papers done where the researchers didn't actually do homework. They just basically were like, all right, let's just have a bunch of people go do some nasal breathing and have some people do some mouth breathing. And, nobody had any development in anything. And that's not how physiology works, nonetheless, when you are in this equal in and out nasal only, you can guarantee you're pretty highly aerobic. So meaning you're really on that green end. Now, the interesting thing, what we saw was that through development of this in about 4 to 6 weeks for a lot of people, that will translate to some very high output in the green zone. So like I had a CrossFitter who basically, he was a games athlete who, when we started him, he could only get to a 140 heart rate nasal breathing. This is a gear 3, but in a month, we had him at a 171 heart rate, and his breathing was closer towards a gear 2, gear 1, and he felt like he could go forever. Yeah.
So it takes 4 to 6 weeks
roughly
at that gear 1. My other thought is, how often are you supposed to always train? Are you always supposed to train that lower gear 1 or gear 2 or gear 3?
No.
Okay.
You don't need to. No, but for most people, they should, because going and doing things where their mouth breathing is only going to retard the process, because then their thinker is going to get involved. And they're not going to like that they have to slow down for the other thing. I mean, some people can compartmentalize pretty decently, but most cannot, from what I've experienced.
So they just have to, and or whoever has to just get used to training at that lower level than they're used to, so that they can.
Yeah.
If they do my other question was, if they do a competition, are they okay? You've got your competition. Can they go into the red zone for the entirety of their competition, or if they've been training with nasal breathing, do they stay in, kind of the same range they've been training in, or again, do they go into the red zone? Do they just try to do their best to maintain nasal breathing and use their mouth sometimes, or like, how does?
Depends on the athlete, the sport, and the time that they've taken to do this.
Okay.
I just watched a video with a UFC fighter who was just interviewed, and the gal was like, you were nasal. You never opened your mouth once during that fight. You've been like you were breathing out of your nose the entire fight. Like, and the guy said, look, once you take the red pill for breathing, you really understand things, and you don't need to go back to this dysfunctional side of things. Anybody who actually does the time and has somebody to guide them. I mean, I'm working with a number of UFC fighters right now. But regardless, a few of them probably won't be able to get there because they can't slow down enough for the other things that they're doing, where they still have to, believe they have to win when they're, in camp. Right. Because the head game is strong, man. But The same thing with endurance athletes. People just don't want to slow down. They don't want to
Mm-hmm.
take the time to let their physiology develop, and they don't understand why there could be metabolic problems, or why their knee hurts, or why their foot hurts, or why their hip hurts. And it's like, what does that have to do with breathing? Well, let me explain. When you are a mouth breather, you're more sympathetically charged. You're more sympathetically dominant. When you breathe out of your nose, you're parasympathetically dominant. When you're using faster energy for sugar, for glucose, right? So when you're in that yellow zone, your tissue is more tense. Your system is more tense. When you mouth breathe more, you're more tense.
Mm-hmm.
So the tissue takes longer to recover.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they're not giving themselves enough recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking, but in these, like, let's say I'm a fighter. Let's say I'm a UFC
Yeah.
fighter. I've got a 2-minute round, and my body basically thinks I'm
5.
fighting 5-minute.
Yeah.
Clearly, I watch a lot of UFC.
Yeah. It's all right.
So let's think I'm in this 5-minute. My body basically thinks that I'm fighting for my life, right? Or maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you're breathing through your nose, maybe you don't think that. But I guess what I'm thinking is, you have your parasympathetic nervous system for a reason, right? Because it turns on, and it can take you in. I'm assuming it can turn on and takes you into a higher gear, or makes you able to do more. Are you saying that?
You're going to see the room.
Mm-hmm.
When you're sympathetic dominant, you're like this.
Mm.
And if you've ever watched a fight where somebody's basically just starts to get their ass kicked and they can't do anything, or they gas out, like once they're gassed out, like everybody in boxing or fighting knows this. The moment you see that jaw just go drop, and they're gasping for air, it's over. They're like this. They can't see what's coming from over here and over here. It's impossible. There is no coming back.
So fighters have to be able to stay in control in order to be in the fight.
That's the name of the game.
Start losing control.
That's the name of the game. And unfortunately, they'll convince themselves otherwise of that. Like the head's the biggest problem with any and all of us, including myself. We've constructed culturally in a way that, it's just a very, like, we have so many attachments to ideas. We don't know how to listen to our heart or listen to the gut. We just don't know how to listen to our physiology at all. Something that's innate. Our ability to listen to our physiology, our ability to listen to our gut, our ability to listen to our heart, that's really just one thing. That's listening to your physiology. That's what your body is communicating to you constantly. This is an innate thing we are born with. Like your son is born with the ability to tell you exactly when he is hungry, when he needs to be cleaned, and when he is going to go to sleep. Right? These are very primary things like that are happening. It's just driven. We start to go, shh, no, let me here. Like all these games start to get played based on how our emotional intelligence functions, right? So because society at large has the emotional quotient of like fucking what we had 200 years ago, we just aren't driving ourselves in the way that technology and everything else is trying to drive. So our attachments go to the things that we construct as like these, oh, I need to have this. I need to win this race. I need to do this event. I need to go. Well, no, what you actually need to do is listen to your fucking body. Like you're breaking down right now because you have this idea that you need to go accomplish this thing. And I get it. It's gotten some people out of hard times, some really rough times, like kids out of ghettos, like the whole David Goggins thing, like that, bro, that saved his life, that changed his life. But time gonna come due, can guarantee that at some point for the body if you don't listen to it, and that's what we've seen. And I am convinced that breathing sits right now. I'm convinced that breathing sits at the forefront of that signal. that when something's off. And it's not that we should have to run around and control our breathing. I'm not going to go teach my dog how to breathe. I'm not going to teach some cheetah or some zebra how to breathe. I don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to teach what's wild anything.
Mm-hmm.
They do it the way it's supposed to be done. That's why zebras run like zebras, cheetahs run like zebras, or cheetahs run like cheetahs, right? Like all of these animals move and do things all in the most similar fashions. They don't, because they're operating under the laws of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
We're operating under attachments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our problem sits. And so when we actually want, like, I get like wanting to train for something or do something, but it's like, well, how about we train your physiology to get there first?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that should be the first goal, but it's not. It's usually the last, because the last comes when they're injured, overtrained, overworked, don't know how to regulate, all of that, versus like, hey, do you want to enjoy this the rest of your, I mean, you want to get out of this in a good way, or you want to be stuck to this ideology you've created around who you are?
Yeah.
Like,
so I think this is a great segue into your realizations with breathing.
Yeah.
And kind of what I'm getting a sense of is that if these people who basically overwork themselves, if they were better able to recognize their breathing and use that as a tool to gauge where they were physiologically, then they would have been able to sense that, hey, I'm working too hard right now, or I'm putting out too much work right now and I'm not able to recover and I'm really stressed. And I'm curious, what was your personal experience with that? And what did that, as far as opening up the rabbit hole, what all did that uncover?
That was my experience. I mean, I was pretty cooked. And I didn't even really realize it. I couldn't nasal breathe to save my life. And then I finally locked it up and was like, screw it. I'm going 4 weeks doing this straight. I'll stop. And if I can't nasal breathe anymore, and then I'll get back to it and repeat it.
Is that like one really good way to, I'm curious, like, how can people gauge this for themselves? Is that the nasal breathing the best way? Are there some other ways that they can try?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be done. It's just how deep into the well do you want to go? Starting a breath practice, having a breath practice, like starting your day with one, ending your day with one, you're bookending, controlling your nervous system, getting a hold of it, engaging in some walking, at least like some decent walking, probably 3 or 4 times a week. Shutting your mouth and walking, not talking on your phone and walking.
Yeah, just leave your phone at home.
Well, take it with you, but just don't talk. I can tell it's like, and the reason I say that is, if you don't believe me, go get yourself a portable metabolic cart and go for a walk and put it on and breathe out of your mouth. And then for 5 minutes, do that. And then do it for 5 minutes with your mouth shut. You're going to see 2 very different forms of energy that are being used. And that was what we saw. And we kept repeating it, and we kept seeing it with everybody. So it's not like I didn't just want to make any of this. I was like, let's test this stuff. Let's just see what's going. Nobody's testing this. So we did that. That's what we did. I mean, I've been up to San Francisco State University, and we've tested on the Cosmed. We've done stuff there with breath control. We've got some papers and things that are working right now in research. But the important part is that people need to do this for themselves, not for what the research says. Going out and doing some training to the degree that you don't have to blow through it, but you can control your breathing, you're going to instantaneously change your relationship to oxygen. And the reason you're doing that is because you're controlling how much actual CO2 is getting out of you. Okay. When you breathe through your nose, you're actually taking deeper breaths. And when you breathe through your mouth, you're not taking as deeper breaths. So you're faster with your mouth breathing. You're slower with your nasal breathing. But you're basically digging in and bringing in oxygen. You can only absorb so much oxygen, and that oxygen will come out. It's how much oxygen I'm actually using in the system, which is a part of what how the Bohr effect works, which is a dissociative curve. It's basically the relationship between oxygen and hemoglobin, and how that works with the pH of the blood. And carbon dioxide plays that switch. So there's an intimate relationship with carbon dioxide and oxygen. Look at it kind of as like an equal. Like if I don't have enough carbon dioxide, I don't get to use all that oxygen that's potentially in the cell. And you have billions of oxygen molecules in one red blood cell, right? Which are strung up on hemoglobin, which is the protein that carries the red pigment in the red blood cell, but that also is kind of the magnet that sucks onto oxygen when you take a breath in. So those capillary beds at the ends of the alveolar beds that are allowing diffusion to happen are picking up, like, oxygen's going in the blood, and the red blood cell is quickly dumping CO2, and O2 is entering in to suck onto that hemoglobin. Well, the only way that oxygen comes off is if there's CO2 to kick it off. And if I overbreathe, it's not that I'm taking in more oxygen or less oxygen. It's the control of CO2, and it's the allowance to do that. And unfortunately, that's our mechanism to breathe. It's also our panic switch. So CO2 is the mechanism to breathe when we're conscious, largely. Okay. So if I just said, all right, everybody hold your breath, and I just ran a timer, however many people are listening to this show is exactly how many different breath holds you'd have. That right there tells you the difference in how we tolerate carbon dioxide, not oxygen. That is the sensing mechanism for how you breathe. And so if I feel like I'm panicky, there's a relationship, there's a physiological connection between CO2 and the brain and our panic switch. This is why anxiety is through the roof largely. It's people's CO2 tolerances are like, it's not the whole story, but from a physiological perspective, there isn't a person with anxiety I have not come across and done a consult with who does not have a low CO2 tolerance score.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to get through all of the, I'm trying to get through all of what you're saying and distill it into like do this because this. And so, something that happened for me while you were explaining that, something that I used to think of before was people would say, well, nasal breathing is more efficient. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to run out of oxygen. It's here. I'm not going to breathe it all up. So yes, I'd love to be more efficient, but like, so the point is not that you're using less oxygen. The point is that the faster you breathe, the more carbon dioxide the more you're expelling, or the more you're keeping in.
Yeah, or you could say that, or the faster you're breathing, the less you're using oxygen.
The less you're using oxygen.
Oxygen is the most critical component to your health. Okay?
Okay.
It's how you are basically breaking down substrates for energy. It's your brain needs it to function, right? Like the better you use oxygen, the more the essentially the healthier you are, because the better your mitochondria function. Okay. So yes, you're offloading excessive CO2, but look at it as like you're using less oxygen the more you breathe.
Okay. Got it. And if you're breathing faster, then you're going to have higher levels of anxiety. You're going to be more stressed. You're going to have a higher risk of injury. Like all of
Yeah, and
these.
you may not even have that. You may be breathing fast. I can guarantee you're reactive and stressed out.
Hmm. Okay.
I
So,
mean, yeah, it's just it's across the boards of what breathing tells us about what's going on. It's not the answer by
hmm.
any stretch. Like there's many biochemical things that go on, like nutrition, et cetera. Like I think are major things that we've fallen again into ideological like little silos.
Hmm.
I eat this way because cavemen did. I've
Right.
done all this, man. I've done it all. Like I used to sit in every camp there was,
Hmm.
and then I started really, I'm investing time in all these things. But it's like your nutrition is going to affect your pH, and if your pH gets affected, the first thing to get affected is going to be your breathing.
Hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to get a better idea of what are the other things you noticed outside of, you know, when we talk about, I want to understand when you started focusing on your breathing more, what other things did you start thinking about? Let's talk about, like, we can talk about your mental
Hmm.
well-being. Let's talk about your emotional well-being. I mean, were there
Yeah.
what what did you learn? What did you discover? What came up? How did you start thinking? Did you start thinking differently? Like what are these? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I became less reactive, which gave me time to actually respond, more time to respond to things. I was still reactive to plenty, and I still react to plenty. Um, but breathing slowed me down enough to actually give a shit about what my patterns were.
So it made you
And
think more about your actions. Can you
yes, more importantly, my patterns.
mm, okay.
Yeah, which leads directly into I think we could call it your emotional intelligence.
Mm,
Um, and most of us aren't at the place, and I was not for quite some time, to actually recognize that. Um, I think, yeah, I'm almost certain some of the statistics are like right around 100 or 200 years where our emotional quotient has not actually changed. It's not
mm,
done. It's not any better. It's like not progressed at all. Um, and it's a sad thing because biologically speaking, that's our limbic system, which is a part of kind of where the emotions play,
mm-hmm,
right? But it also plays up into the prefrontal cortex and the developed part of the cortex, right? These are newer things to our biology.
mm-hmm,
Um, and when I say that, we talk about human beings being a specific age. I'm really of the mindset that's a really poor decision that we've made. I mean, we've got cells on us that in us and on us that are as old as this planet, or three-quarters the age of this planet, right? So they've been replicating that long. We've got hardware on us that is so old that it's like there's a reason why it's gone this long.
mm.
Like there's a reason why it's made this long of a time and why this new operating system is trying to figure it all out. And the fact that we're not progressing some of that stuff is scary. Um, and that's where this whole busy, like gotta do more, gotta,
Mm.
the whole internet, social media, all of it, it's not bad, but you better be aware of what it's doing. If you're on it enough,
Yeah.
because it is affecting how this system works. And it's not that I can't be a nice guy and a quality human being on it. No, you're going to change how your brain actually functions and how the systems in that actually function. And you're going to start having to scroll, look, tap, do things. And this impacts your day outside of that stuff.
That
And,
sounds scary because that's basically saying that you are becoming what you are doing on social media.
We are. We think we
And
know
I've
who
never
people
thought
like.
about
Well,
that in the terms of like me doing social media and me
think
becoming
about
social media. That sounds
think about it.
gross,
Other
and
than
you're
the
and you're
fact that
true.
you and I have like spent a number of hours on phone calls and gotten to know each other slightly, we don't truly know each other, right? But by and large, we do think we know who people are based on what we watch on social media. And yet people are only showing you what they want to show you.
Right.
They don't show you what they don't want to show you.
That's very true.
So how is it we're going to actually understand? We can't. It's an impossible. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm a part of this. Like I'm in this whole thing, right? Like, but breathing got me to the point to where I really started looking at my patterns, which is I'm going back to these patterns. There is no, the path is not in a pattern. There is no truth in a pattern. There's no truth lies in a pattern. And the truth sits outside all patterns. That was Bruce Lee. That was J. Krishnamurti. This is philosophers well before Brian McKenzie decided to fucking pop that one out of his mouth. But it does not exist in a pattern. This is why you won't see animals behaving in like animals like are very different behaviorally than we are. Sure. Oh, they eat the same way. They do, like, but there is no, I have to go do this. I have to go do that. No, the weather just changed. I felt the pressure change. I'm moving down here versus like, oh, well, I'm still going to go train and work out is the way I need to, or I'm going to expose myself in this storm and, do this thing. Like we get caught up in the ideas of thinking and the attachments of what we're doing. And these end up, this is where the patterns start to show up. So by slowing myself down, and actually taking the time to start to look at some of the patterns or the ways I react to things, I started to allow myself to respond differently. And I started to look at things differently. And then that opened up a whole can of worms into, well, what's this doing from a neurobiological standpoint? And
so,
yeah.
What were some specific patterns that you learned or uncovered or that came up and you were like, whoa?
Constantly needed to be doing something.
Okay. I feel that one.
Can't sit still.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just who I am. No.
Yeah.
No, that is not.
And how do you?
No. You are not what you do. You are not. We are not what we do.
Yeah. So how did you address that when you realized that?
I mean, it took some time, man. It took a lot of time, but it's like, I catch myself all the time and it's like, oh, got to go do something. I'm trying to force myself. Why can't I sit still right now? Oh, why can't I be bored? What I used to get, dude, I didn't have a phone when I was a kid. I didn't have the computer to screw around on as a kid. I got bored all the time and was I used to go screw around in the woods. Like I used to go build jumps. Like I used to go like get lost like in things. Why can't I go get lost in something? Why can't I go play? Why do I need to be doing anything? I don't need to do anything. How about I just experience something? Driving, right? Like I challenged myself at one point. I used to drive like a maniac. I mean, in some people's idea, probably not a maniac, but other people's, definitely like a maniac. But I grew up in Southern California. I drove fast, was in a hurry to go everywhere, raced around people, cut people off, got cut off, got pissed off when people cut me off, took it personally. I challenged myself to just drive the speed limit and for a week, and that didn't work for a day. And then I came back to it a few weeks later and literally did a week. And now I'm the guy who puts it in cruise control and doesn't drive 5 miles an hour over the speed limit because I'm no longer in a rush to get anywhere, man. On occasion, I'll catch myself starting to go a little faster, but it's like things start to change when you become aware of them. And all of a sudden, that way of doing something that you thought was you is you're no longer doing it. And you're like, oh, I guess that wasn't me. No.
So when let's focus on this one thing in particular, because I think this is a really relatable pattern, is this idea of I have to do something all the time. How did you feel, or how did you realize that was I don't want to say bad, but how did you realize that that wasn't, I don't
One,
know how to
there's
say
no
it other
bad.
than
There
your
is no
truth.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let me preface everything I've just kind of gone on a little bit of a bender on. There's no bad in any of this. If your goal is to become more aware,
Mm.
which God honest truth, that's all I'm doing with anybody I work with or consult for.
Mm.
I'm just trying to I'm just guiding them towards understanding how to be more aware so they can develop their own practice, the own way they want, but to be more aware.
Mm.
Awareness is the answer to it all. Like that is from what I've come to understand. So what was the question?
I don't remember. Oh, it was, how did you become aware of that pattern, and what made you, did you intuit, or did you feel that this was a pattern that didn't resonate with who you were, or what was it, or did you just realize that it was causing you discomfort or
But like
stress,
with
or
driving?
the driving thing, or no, with
Yeah.
the specifically with the you having to do something at all times?
Oh yeah. That's just a function of society and culture. And I was just being sheep, and I bought into the whole idea, hook, line, and sinker, just like everybody
Mhm.
else. And you know, we've got an economy that moves at the speed of light, right, and needs to function, and that's got marketing and everything behind it. And
Mhm.
I found when I started to slow down more that I started to care less about all of that stuff.
Mm.
And I cared more about my experiences with things. I stopped taking pictures less of things that I was doing,
Mhm.
because I was present with what I was doing. I wasn't
Mm.
trying to actually create a moment that I was going to attempt to share with people, being
Mhm.
an amateur fucking photographer with my iPhone. Yeah, I mean, I watch it like I'm making fun of myself because I used to take pictures of everything I do, and I'd have this like thousands upon thousands of pictures in my phone.
Mhm.
It's like I live in the mountains now. I went skiing, like snowboarding today, and it was a powder day, and I can't tell you how many people were stopped on the mountain taking pictures or videos of things,
Mhm.
willing to stop with their experience to try and get an idea of that to actually share with other people while not. And there's no way to actually share that with anybody. How's anybody supposed to be like, oh yeah, that was awesome that I got to go experience your powder run?
Right.
Like, no, man.
Yeah.
I could tell you the story about it, but it's like we're so caught up in just trying to share everything. Where's
Mhm.
that, like social
Yeah.
media. Got to share it, man. Like
Yeah.
share
This
share what makes, I want to share, but I'm not going to share what I don't want to share.
Yeah, that actually brings up a great habit of yours that I only uncovered last week. Um, you delete all of your Instagram posts right after you posted a new, and so you only have one post on your
There's
there's
three
three right
right now
now?
because I'm doing a
Okay.
series. But yeah, I basically decided that I didn't want, there were so many, like I get all these messages, and I started to catch on to people basically taking information that, I myself or the people I work with take a lot of time to curate and share, and they're basically just memorizing it or regurgitating it.
Mm.
And I've done that in the past. But I'm at a point where I was just like, you know what? I just want to, like, it's not that I don't want to share information with people. I do,
Mhm.
but memorizing anything is not a skill.
Mhm. Right.
Learning something it requires some sort of like scare or like jolt, right?
Mhm.
Like learning is like immersing yourself into something and not studying it like we did in school, which is like the most ass backwards place of learning that we've ever created. Um,
Mhm.
Nonetheless, I just felt it was, and like I just unfollowed everybody except my businesses and my foundation, so that I stopped scrolling through and clicking on things and liking things, and like doing the mindless
Yeah.
thing. So I go, I take some time, work through something, and I basically drop it and get out,
Yeah.
and I'm out.
Yeah.
And that has changed me physiologically.
Yeah. That's definitely definitely a good way to go if you're looking to relieve stress. I think I had a solid 6-month period where I deleted all the apps from my phone, and I didn't get on social media. I think I monitored my Facebook group. Like I have a private Facebook group for our community. So I answered questions there, but I didn't do any timeline. I didn't do any Instagram. And slowly but surely, within the last couple months, I still don't have the apps on my phone, but my brain has learned that I can also open a browser and use the browser version of Instagram or Facebook, and so I've sucked myself back in. So I don't know how I'm gonna get myself out of it this time. But one other thing you told me, you only have you I made you download an extra app so you could do this podcast with me.
All right, I'll get deleted after this.
Yeah, I hope so. But you only have like 3 things on your home screen?
Yeah, I've got my messages, WhatsApp, and then Signal, and then a virtual private network browser if I need to get on the internet and like study something.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a brick you've got in your. It's a true brick you've got in your hand instead of. I know. It's probably better for you though. So.
Dude, it's my screen time, like went down, like 80%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get into my rapid fire question section, which isn't really rapid fire, but is some questions. And I'd love to hear your answers. So I'm going to just dive in. What do you think is one habit, a belief, or a mindset that has helped you the most or helped you significantly in terms of your overall happiness? Maybe something we haven't discussed yet, or if it's something that's so important that you'd like to mention it again, then do it again.
I think probably to experiment, just be an experiment. Like don't get fit, like that whole thing with the driving, right? That was just an experiment. I wonder what will happen if I do this for a week. And it changed my life. Like legitimately changed my life. Like not just the driving experience, which changed, but my entire life.
Do you track? I'm curious. How do you assess that? Do you journal about it? Do you just think about it? Or?
I write a lot, but that's taken, a decade or more of writing. But I experiment a lot. I'm super curious. I'm just very curious in experiential ways. And so I like to challenge my own like kind of patterns with things, and that the driving thing slowed me down so much. And then it becomes so grossly apparent when I get in the car with other people, because I'm like, not judging in a judging way, but like, I'm like, holy shit, like they're just a nervous mess, like trying to get somewhere. And it's like, wow. And I don't need to tell them what to do because I'm not, but it's like, I was that, and I could go be that again if I want. It brought my pulse down a lot, man. It changed a lot. I think we are scared of finding out who we are because we don't know that we can find out who we are. We think we're what we do. That's why it's like, well, so what do you do when you meet somebody? Like, I'm a human performance specialist or whatever. Like, it's like, how about what do you like? What do you love to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. What is one thing that you do for your health that you think is overlooked or undervalued by other people?
I mean, breathing's the obvious one, but it's like,
what's your breath practice look like right now? Or how did it start? What's like a good way to start?
10 minutes a day in the morning.
Okay. So you just
Te-
sit and breathe.
sit and find a breathing pattern you like. If you go to shiftadapt.com, our website,
Okay.
there's a tab that'll come down on what we do, and it'll say 3 steps to starting a breath practice. Follow that stuff.
Perfect.
And that'll dial people in for really a breathing protocol that'll work for them based on their exhale test, which is basically testing their CO2 tolerance. It's a great way to just go sit and follow something and then repeat it and then retest the CO2 tolerance and see if it increases over time. And you'll start to notice that bucket gets a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger as that score starts to get longer and longer and longer. So your bandwidth gets bigger and you're a little bit calmer and things function a lot better. So,
got it.
You know, breathing's the obvious, but there's no amount of breathing you can do with a pain you're not willing to confront. So meaning like you could go do all the breath work in the world, but if you're not willing to fucking look at the pain that's, you're suffering for, like changing your fucking driving, like looking at things like, why would I want to do that? Right. Like so one of the people who I work with, she's just like, she has this aversion to blood and like getting blood done, all that stuff. Her new experiment is she's going to do glucose monitoring like 3 times a day for and she's going to figure out like, I'm just like, you should just try this out, go through the experience and see what you can learn. But I prefaced it with this story. That there's an Alan Watts story on how, this Westerner went to Japan to get into this Zen monastery, and the Zen master wouldn't let him in. And the guy kept begging and begging and show up every day and beg and beg and beg. And after a few months, he finally said, okay, I'll let you in on this condition. Every morning you wake up, you're going to go down to the stream, and they're in the mountains in Japan where there's snow and all that. And you're going to get a bucket of freezing water and you're going to slowly pour it over your head in the morning. And then you can come and you can join us in the thing. You can't go warm yourself up. You can't go dry anything. Anyway, this guy literally went and lived like he did this. And every day he'd get up and he'd just be like, fuck, I got to go pour this cold freezing water over me. It's hard as hell to get warm again. Da, da, da. And then a few months into this, the guy realizes that, the way he's looking at this cold is the reason why he might as well start to enjoy this because he's suffering through this process. Right. So the guy somehow just gives up and says, you know what, I'm going to start to learn to enjoy this cold. Oh, it can wake me up. It can do all these things. Like it makes, I feel invigorated and my body's going to warm up and I haven't died yet. And like all this stuff. And at that moment, the Zen master said, you're allowed to be in the monastery now. So he basically changed the way he was looking at this thing and how he was doing it. It changed his entire life, right? But we are so very fixated on a lot of things, like the thing, like, oh, cold training, like that's the hot thing. That's what I got to do, right? And it's like, there's the same story goes is that a student walked up and saw the Zen master rubbing 2 bricks together in full lotus. And he was like, master, what are you doing? And he says, I'm making a mirror. And he goes, you can't rub 2 bricks together and make a mirror. And he said, and you can't meditate and find enlightenment, but you're going to do that the rest of your life, aren't you?
Yeah.
So breathing's great.
And that's the, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's great. And these things we do are awesome, but they are not making us who we are. Like I shouldn't have to control my breathing to do anything. I should be able to shift into where I want to go and what I want to do next and pay attention to my breathing. Just so happens if you screw around with your breathing enough, like if you're practicing enough, when you're working hard enough, you prefer to breathe out of your nose than your mouth. Because when you start to breathe out of your mouth at the same work rates, you can feel the tension in your body and you can start to feel what happens physiologically. And you can only handle that for so long. So you start to be able to listen to your body and all these things. And it's like, oh, no wonder why indigenous culture did this. Like,
so in this story, I'm curious what your recommendation would be. So What would your recommendation be for someone who wants to start changing that pattern or change the way that they look at things to, is it by focusing on breathing and journaling? Is it just by
The
thinking?
easiest path would be to find something like my driving or like the aversion to blood that I just talked about, and going and doing it until you could love it or figure out how to change it in a different way so that you can potentially understand that that's not who you are, and that this whole idea of like blood being gross, or I'm not like I just drive fast because I like it. And it's like, no, you're doing it because you're in a rush to get somewhere that you don't know. You have like, you can't actually be present where you're at right now. There is no I'm like future. Like there really is not. It's just now. And so what are you doing now to be present with who you are? And why is it always trying to do something more, right? Like I would go pick something that, the fastest way is to find something you really are hardwired with, thinking this is just the way you do things and you're not going to change that for anything. Like I can't tell you how many dudes I've talked to who I've worked with, who I've thrown that driving thing at, and they're like, oh, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. Nope. I just have to drive. No, I drive. I'm like, I guess there isn't.
Yeah, I think that would be a great. That would be a great test for me. Would be to do that. Actually, my dad does that. He drives a speed limit, and it's a recent adaptation, but it is something that he does. So
great.
It's a cool thing to do, but
yeah,
works. So do you? Let's see. I mean, do you regularly reflect or analyze yourself? Do you have like periodic?
Always.
All the time?
Every day.
What's that look like?
Well, it's usually in an uncomfortable moment, or a moment where I feel a change in things, or a pattern, or like an old behavior. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. That just popped up. Why'd that just happen? Let me look at this.
Yeah. And you're able to, got it. And you're just.
Yeah. Like for instance, today, something happened that I'm very clued into. There was an older guy behind me in line, and I was in the singles line to get on the lift. Bunch of people trying to get on the lift. And it was a 6-person chair. And the guy in front of me jumps in with a group of people. And then there's a group that goes by that's 5 people, and I just let them go because they're a bunch of skiers, and I'm on my snowboard today. I ski and snowboard, and I let them go. And the guy behind me goes, "That was 5. You could go with them." And I just sat there, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And there's my head starting to run it, right? And another group of 5 goes by, but I see a group of 2 snowboarders behind them that I've planned on going with. And the guy goes, "That's another group of 5. You can go with them." And I just turned around and looked at him, and I was like, "You want to go in front of me?" And the guy just goes, sorry. I normally would have said, "Fuck off." Like, the old me was like getting teed up to do something. It's just like, hey man, you want to go in front of me? Like, it's cool. Like, and that's that point. And it's like, I didn't even need to sit on the chair and think about that guy at all. Right. Had I wigged out on him, that would have spun in my head for some time. Yeah. And that dude would have taken up real estate for quite some time for my day.
Yeah.
Instead, I enjoyed powder in the trees and had a great day, and didn't have to think about this dude who was freaking out about getting in line, like whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, he's in a rush. Like, I get it. Most people are in a rush.
And the theme that I'm getting from what you've been saying is that by practicing, I'll say nasal breathing, but really by just keeping yourself in this more relaxed state where you're breathing slowly, where you're not anxious, where you're able to be where you're able to think about your responses rather than, just doing whatever you automatically feel, that gives you the ability to do that kind of thinking, to make
I
those
look
kinds of.
forward to very hard, emotionally reactive things that are going on underneath the hood to get to explore that.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't want to be just some, Zen hippie person. I don't. I still want to be my experience. Like I'm a part of what I've grown up with through my parents and culture and all of that, man. But I don't have to be an asshole, and I don't have to be internalizing things. And I want to experience life. I don't want to rush to get somewhere else.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the most stressful part of your day-to-day life?
Probably the mornings in getting organized to like get out of the house. I got a dog, got to get her fed, whether I'm going skiing or whether I'm going to train or whether I'm going to go do some sort of thing, whatever. I take care of myself first. I 4 days out of the week, I have meetings with business that are in the morning that I'll take on my way to something. But I take care of myself first in the day. And I think the most stressful part is usually when I get up. I don't wake up to an alarm, but it's like, oh, what time did I wake up at? Oh, I've only got so much time to like get food ready and all of that, and get my dog ready and get that done and get her out, like walk her and make sure she's taken care of, etc.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing men in their well-being right now?
Their ego. They're like, that I shouldn't even say that. Like, the ego is nothing more than the focus of conscious attention. So most men are so focused outwardly, like that whole statement with Greg Glassman, men will die for points. We're so focused on things outside of us. It's society. This is our entire problem. This is why we don't actually understand what love is. You cannot have love with an attachment to anything, including a person. So getting rid of those attachments and finding out that you have, like, inside you've got every tool needed to thrive.
Does getting rid of attachments means letting go of expectations? What specifically, what does that mean?
I don't know that necessarily expectations, but an attachment would be to something or someone. I need this. An attachment. Here's a big one. I need to buy that house. Do you? I don't think you understand the difference between wants and needs. You'll be perfectly fine without that house, but you don't believe that. I need that girl. Do you? Yeah. We need to start to be able to look at people and things kind of like sunrises and sunsets. Why can't we do that? Because of attachment. You can sit there and look at a sunrise or a sunset and be like, and just be in awe, right? And just be like, fuck, that's so beautiful right now. That's cool, right? And it's going to go away, and you're okay with that. Because it's probably going to come back.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like, it's such a beautiful thing, and it's great, and it's awesome, and I can just let it be. I don't have to get it to change or do anything for me. So it's like, look at the people in your life, look at the things in your life, and let them be so that you can enjoy them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's concrete. I can take that.
Doesn't mean you can't buy a house.
Well, depends if you're in Central Texas or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my complaint about real estate in Austin right now.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious for myself. Do you have courses on breathing? What kind of, what do you do with
Yeah.
shift adapt?
Yep.
Yeah. So
So
what's some good ways for people to learn more about that kind of stuff?
yeah, so we have a membership program on there that basically takes people through breathe and move, strength and conditioning work, and then some aerobic development work if they want as well. This all utilizes breath control. We have courses, the Art of Breath course, which we have online. We also do that in person. We'll be doing one at the UFC in March next month.
Cool.
We have the Skill of Stress course, which Emily Hightower does. That's online. And then Emily Hightower and I run a collaborative mentorship program. I also run a mentorship program where people can sign up and request mentorship. And then we do events. We have an event this April out here in the mountains of Colorado where we're going to be doing all this stuff about exposure and basically exposing you to stress and teaching you how to read, regulate, and reinforce that stuff and really understand that.
That's cool. That sounds awesome.
It's if you go on a Shift Adapt and check it out, you'll see it's at a pretty radical location as well. It's at my buddy's place that is pretty unreal.
Yeah.
It'll blow your mind.
That sounds like I live in pretty much, 4 miles from downtown, which is still pretty much in the city. And I'm looking out my back window right now and there's not enough nature. There's I can drive for 10 minutes and I can see some rivers and some little hills and some stuff, but it's not enough.
Yeah. Man. I climbed an 11,000 foot mountain today.
Sounds awesome. Hey, so selfishly, I have one more question. If I wanted to start incorporating nasal breathing into my weight training routine, what would that look? Do I just drop the weight and start breathing through my nose or taping my mouth or what?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of taping the mouth. Just shut your mouth.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, lower the weight the weight a little bit. But to be honest, it's like weight training. It shouldn't involve some mouth breathing. There's look, to be clear, there is a time to mouth breathe. And when metabolic demand from things like weight lifting, heavy weight lifting happen, you're going to need to offload that CO2 because you're blowing through energy. So, but getting back to nasal breathing is critical. But yeah, it could help. It can help. I definitely don't mouth breathe as much as I used to when I would weight train.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask that, but you were going, man. I didn't want to stop you. So I was going to ask the difference between nasal breathing with resistance training and endurance training, doing 5 reps or lower or something like that. But so my goal should be to, I'm going to have to breathe out of my mouth. If I'm doing resistance training, I'm doing something heavy
at a certain point,
but try to get back to.
Yeah. Let it happen. Keep your mouth shut. And then when it's like, fuck, I got to breathe out of my mouth, breathe out of your mouth.
Cause you'll probably pass out if you don't.
Then when you're done with the set and rack that thing, how quick can you get back to nasal breathing? Or can you just sometimes what I'll do is I restrict the recoveries to nasal breathing and it sucks at first. It's claustrophobic at first. Right.
Okay.
But not all the time, but that's a very quick way to make some very big changes.
Okay, that sounds cool. That sounds like something I can do right now.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to incorporating that. So aside from all the stuff we just mentioned, you've got your Instagram. When you don't delete all your posts,
I'm going to be posting. I don't know that I'm going to be deleting anymore. I think I'm just going to keep going, but I'm actually really thinking about what I'm putting out, and it's a little fucking drawn out because there's a bit on survival I'm doing right now. I'm doing this contrast between cells and humans in general. And I'm working through that whole thing right now. And then I'm going to start layering in some breathing stuff after that.
Cool.
But yeah.
So is that the Instagram best way to keep up with you or what other stuff?
Yeah. Or you can go to Shift. at shift_adapt.
Mhm.
That's a lot of stuff. We put out a lot of content and information.
Yeah,
on
you
there.
do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
yeah.
All right. Well, Brian, that was an awesome conversation. That was like an hour and a half, and it just pretty much flew by. So thank you for being an awesome guest. Thank you for your participation in Yoga for Athletes. We didn't even
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, people should get the book, but the fact
people-
of the matter is like we really looked at like breathing and how it, works positionally through the poses that you chose to put up.
Mhm.
And I think we took a very unique approach to that, one that,
Mhm.
is much different than what I think is mostly mainstream in yoga.
Yeah, and it's actually those few conversations that I had with you and that stuff that I put in the book has actually changed the way that I personally do yoga, and it's also changed the way that I teach. So I talk much more now about breathing into spaces and how you can use your breath to expand certain areas, especially in twist. I found that when I'm doing twist and I'm like working more into my thoracic mobility, I found that breathing there and visualizing getting wider across my back has been really helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody go check out Brian, go check out Shift Adapt. Thanks for joining me today. And I will see you guys in the next episode or see you in the next video. Thanks again, Brian.
Yeah, thanks.
If you like that episode, check out this other one right here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed, click this subscribe button over here, and you can listen to the full episodes on any major podcasting platform. Full details below in the description.